Hello and welcome. Let's take a look at the big story we're tracking for you this hour. The former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom has launched a scathing attack against Boris Johnson, calling his government's actions shameful. In a fierce speech at the Institute for Government in Westminster, the former Conservative Prime Minister John Major condemned the excuses given by Downing Street to deny that any rules were flouted. He called the lies deliberate and fatal to political careers.
At number 10, the Prime Minister and officials broke lockdown laws. Brazen excuses were dreamed up. Day after day, the public was asked to believe the unbelievable. Ministers were sent out to defend the indefensible, making themselves look gullible or foolish as they did so. Collectively, this has made the government look distinctly shifty, which has consequences that go far beyond political unpopularity.
This condemnation from the former British leader comes as the Conservative lawmakers await investigations reports into the Downing Street parties held during lockdown. In what can be referred to as a call to action for the Tory members, John Major reminded the Parliament of its duties towards the country and its people.
The lack of trust in the elected portion of our democracy cannot be brushed aside. Parliament has a duty to address this and correct this. And if it does not, and trust is lost at home, our politics is in no man's land, in disarray, broken. If trust in our word is lost overseas, we may no longer be able to work effectively with friends and partners for mutual benefit or even security.
The British government is basing two investigations into the alleged lockdown parties. One is an internal inquiry by the civil servant Sue Gray, whose full report is yet to become public. And the second one is a criminal investigation being conducted by the London Metropolitan Police, which is intensifying further. Now, the police have sent out 50 questionnaires to people believed to have broken rules. The police have now extended their investigation from 12 to 13 alleged lockdown parties, both at the Prime Minister's residence and office. This has pushed Boris Johnson to face one of his gravest crises since taking office in 2019. After growing calls to quit, condemnation and resignations, Boris Johnson refused to step down, and the Conservative parliamentarians await the investigation reports to be out before taking a decision on a vote of no confidence. Now, the political controversy comes at a time of heightened tension in Ukraine and Europe, as the United Kingdom has begun its diplomatic blitz with Russia and NATO. The investigation into British government followed Boris Johnson to Brussels, where he was addressing a joint press conference with the Secretary-General of NATO. A British reporter asked Boris Johnson about the possibilities of his resignation in case he is found guilty, and this is what the British Prime Minister's response was.
And if you're found to have broken the law, would you resign? And can I ask you to address this directly on behalf of people at home? It's not a hypothetical question.
I understand.
There is a police investigation.
Yeah. So first of all, I mean, on your point about what's going on at home, Laura, that process must be completed, and I'm looking forward to it being completed, and that's the time to say more on that.
Now, for more on this, we are being joined by correspondent Benji Hire from London. Thank you for being with us on this broadcast this evening. Now, this condemnation by John Major, reminding the Parliament of its duties towards the country and its people, just how detrimental could this be to Boris Johnson?
Well, I think if you asked that question a couple of years ago, you would say that it's rather catastrophic. A former leader of a country criticising one of his successors in the role of Prime Minister and also of leader of that Conservative Party. What's interesting, though, is that over the last couple of years, this has become quite a pattern. John Major has been a vocal critic of Boris Johnson on a number of different fronts. His stance on Brexit, the fact that the PM decided to prorogue Parliament early in his administration, and now now most recently to do with the principles and the lack of trust that John Major feels that Boris Johnson is espousing in his position as Prime Minister. You've had a number of different quotes in that introduction, even played a clip of John Major. One stood out to me, which is that outright lies breed contempt, and that if Parliament cannot correct this, then British politics is broken. Those are quite damning terms, but the implication for Boris Johnson really relies not on what the public thinks, what the press thinks, even what really John Major thinks. It's how Conservative MPs, the people that sit behind Boris Johnson, whether they decide that this is the time to try to oust their leader. It's become rather something that's fashionable within the Conservative Party to get rid of their leader before the election rolls around. And there have been a number of mumblings and rumours about Tory MPs taking action against Boris Johnson. A couple of them, a handful, have publicly said that they've handed in letters of no confidence. And if 54 letters are handed in, there will be a confidence vote in the Prime Minister. Now, as for what Boris Johnson feels about this, you heard just before that he said he's going to wait for further outcomes of an investigation. There's no confirmation from him he would resign if he's found to have broken the law in those series of parties during lockdown, but neither a denial either.
Right, and on that, this is what the parliamentarians are waiting for. We have the two pending investigations. One, the internal inquiry by Sue Gray. We don't know when this will become public, and it may be heavily redacted. And the second one, the criminal investigation. When are we expecting the outcomes of these investigations?
It's a good question, really. I mean, we've already had a sort of pre-version of the Sue Gray report. She's a senior civil servant that was given the responsibility of essentially assessing what happened inside Boris Johnson's residence when he allegedly held a number of different events at a time when he was telling the rest of the country you wouldn't be allowed to have gatherings of people inside due to COVID-19 restrictions. There were then revelations that he himself were holding different parties, Christmas events, goodbye parties, even his own birthday party too. Again, he stood up repeatedly in Parliament and claimed that these didn't take place, although he has retrospectively apologised once further revelations come out. That report by Sue Gray, or at least the initial findings of it, not the full thing, was heavily redacted due to that ongoing police report. So we're still awaiting kind of the full outcome of all of this, and we don't know exactly when that investigation will finish. What people will be looking out for is whether Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, the man who leads the government, the big sort of a powerful figure inside Number 10, whether he is found personally responsible for breaking the law, and if he is then fined and given a criminal penalty. Now, that's not the same as going to jail by any means, but the Conservative Party pride themselves on being the party of law and order. Can they really be led and governed by a man who is found to have broken the law? And that will also bring up questions about him telling MPs that nothing happened in terms of gatherings inside Number 10 Downing Street. If he's told MPs one thing and actually that's different from reality, he could be accused of misleading Parliament, and opposition parties argue that would be a reason for him having to resign.
And just quickly, Benji, one last thing. This all at a time when the Prime Minister has called the situation with the Ukraine the most dangerous moment in European security. Surely this should be the biggest focus, and will bring into question his leadership.
Well, it all seems like buses when several things come at the same time, really. Of course, much of the international attention is not what's going on inside kind of UK politics, but on that much wider issue of the Ukraine crisis, there is a big diplomatic effort underway by the UK to de-escalate the crisis. Boris Johnson's been speaking with NATO in Brussels. He's currently in Poland. Foreign Secretary Liz Truss has been speaking to her Russian counterpart in Moscow, although talks were very frosty there. At one point, Sergei Lavrov said that speaking to Liz Truss was effectively like speaking to a deaf person, and then she'll be followed by Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary. Things are getting quite heated there, but Boris Johnson maintaining the argument that any Russian intervention would be catastrophic, and that if needed, he has not ruled out military support from the UK for Ukraine.
WION, now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.